Technology improving lives, right? So, I'm here to tell you about video games, and to tell you that video games are, in fact, art. Great, so let's move on. Okay, so maybe you need a little bit more evidence. It wasn't too long ago that Roger Ebert came out as somewhat famously saying that video games could never be art. Okay, so Chris Sanderson, don't sweat this. I'm about to simplify this slide. He says that the very nature of the medium of video games prevents it from ever becoming art. So how can I stand here and say that not only do I think games can be art, but that they already are? Well, I think the first step in this argument has to be a concession that Roger Ebert is partially correct here when he says that no one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison to the great works of art, which is true. However, painting, started off looking something like this, and not to discredit the original artist, but it's kind of chicken scratches on walls. But over time, it did evolve, right? And in fact, most mediums of art, it began as completely unartistic modes of communication. I mean, voice started with, or speech started with something like, hey, there's a cougar behind you, right? And writing started as a way of tallying our bills and taxes. But over time, writing became a mode of telling stories. And now we bend our vocal cords in ways never imagined in order to create the art of song. So some people might cringe at this. I mean, how could I say that a game as elegant as chess, with elegant mechanics and strategy and metaphor, how could I say that that's not art? Well, I think we have to draw a line between appreciation and art. I mean, because the same reverence in which chess players hold their game could be said the same for football fans and football, and baseball, or mahjong. All of these games have extremely elegant systems that have evolved over time, and yet still continue to amaze us in their ability to surprise and entertain us. And they're games, that's what they're supposed to do. And they're really, really great games, but they're not art. So what do I mean when I say art? Well, not to be Web 2.0 biased, but I do find that Wikipedia has a really great explanation, most articulate that I've found. Which is, art is the process or product of deliberately arranging elements in a way that appeals to the senses or the emotions. And I find resonance between this quote and actually Robert McKee's quote on definition, when he defines the difference between good writing and bad writing. And he defines good writing as being motivated to touch the audience. And so in my layman's term, I would say art is a way of communicating ideas to an audience in a way that the audience finds engaging. So I'd like to present to you my first exhibit, which is a game actually developed by one of USC's own faculty members, Peter Brinson, in conjunction with the digital artist Edo Stern. And it's called Waco Resurrection. In Waco Resurrection, the player plays as David Koresh, defending Branch Davidian from government agents and rogue civilians, trying to convert as many people as he can along the way. And as you can see here, the game begins by the player putting on a David Koresh mask and actually saying the words, "I am David Koresh." That's key to beginning the experience. And then this compression between the player and their character is made even tighter as the player has to go and cast spells using their voice. So it's a gun spell, some magic. And I'm presenting, excuse the compression on the video, I apologize. And I'm presenting this as an exhibit because I think it's part of that step between using writing to tally our taxes and using writing to tell stories. I mean, this is obviously not meant to be a simulation of events in Waco, Texas. All it takes the form of a simulation. And it's also not meant to be an extremely fun game in a traditional sense, because the world, I don't know if you can tell this, but the world is in total chaos throughout the entire experience of the game, from beginning to end, making it very hard to navigate. This game is an expression of its developers about the events of Waco, Texas, not as they happened in reality, but as they feel that they happened in our culture and our society. So my next example is a game, a more recent release. This was a game for Xbox 360, released last year. And developed by Jonathan Blow, Braid is a game that explores our own relationship with our past. In the game, you play as sort of a modern everyman in a Super Mario Brothers style game. You encounter enemies and collect puzzle pieces, but there's one key difference here, which is here. You can't die. You can always rewind time and make up for your mistakes. So these mechanics, along with the visuals, the audio, and a story that's told in between levels, which I have an example of here. He knows she tried to be forgiving, but who can just shrug away a guilty lie, a stab in the back? Such a mistake will change a relationship irreversibly, even if we have learned from the mistake and would never repeat it. And so the game engages the player. When I play this game, it makes me think of my own history and my mistakes in the past. And could we go back and actually ever make up for what's happened? The third example is that game company's recent release for PlayStation 3 called Flower. In Flower, the player is presented with this extremely run-down city apartment and a single flower on the windowsill. By focusing in on the flower, the player is taken away into an imaginary, natural landscape. The player plays as wind blowing flower petals through these various fields. And it's really an expression of the director, Genova Chen, who moved from the extremely metropolitan area of Shanghai, China, to the relatively more rural area of California. And he was just amazed by these huge rolling landscapes. And yet he found over time that he started to miss those elements of the city he grew up with. And so although it starts in these very open, clean environments, as the player goes through the game, they realize that it's about trying to find some sort of harmony or balance between the elements of urban and the natural. So these are just a small selection of games that are now being made that cross that boundary into artistic expression. And there are not only many more in development, but we're seeing that they actually have quite a market impact. The game for 360, Braid, was a top downloaded game on Xbox Live Arcade and has been up for a number of awards. Our first release, Flow, which was an MFA thesis on applying Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory to video games, was also top-selling, and now is being topped by Flower, which has also become one of the highest-rated games on PlayStation Network by critics. And we can see that it's not just these represent an evolution of the medium as far as content, but also an evolution in what audiences are asking for and what they're looking for in a game. And we can see similar trends in the period of early cinema. Initial films began as very heavy-handed, focusing on very simplistic emotions, such as excitement or fear. Sounds pretty similar. But as the medium of film and its audiences grew, audiences' expectations also grew and shifted as well, and then more films were made that then filled in the emotional spectrum of the medium. And when it comes to games, our emotions don't change. The same kind of games we played when we were children just don't work for us anymore. And now we have a generation of gamers who are grown-ups themselves and are starting to wonder if there isn't something more to games? Could our games be more serious? Could they reach higher levels of joy, to ecstasy? Could they reach deeper levels of sadness, to catharsis? And we're seeing now these games as explorations into other parts of the emotional spectrum, and then these games are being rewarded by audiences in high sales figures and critical acclaim. And how awesome is this, right? I mean, how many times does a generation get to witness the birth of an entirely new artistic medium? I mean, games could be the collaboration between everything that we've learned to date as humans about telling stories through visuals, through audio, and now with the added component of interactivity. And if you're a person like me and you learn by doing, then you understand how powerful the medium of interactivity can be. But as a superhero once said, with great power comes great responsibility, right? The reason I'm up here trying to convince you all that video games are art is because I think that once we recognize games as an artistic medium, then we have to recognize that they have an impact on us, and that our media has an impact on us. And this seems like something we should have recognized by now already. And yet when I look at the evolution of two of the most powerful mediums of the 20th century, radio and television, I can only explain what happened by thinking that we didn't recognize this fact, that we in fact dismissed them as just fun and simple and mindless entertainment. I mean, here's the birth of television, the new fireplace of the American home. It empowered households everywhere, not just to hear, but to see events as they were taking place. And we could share in moments of history together and be entertained together in this new version of the American theater. So can you really tell me that the founders of the National Broadcasting Company had this in mind? David Cross, the stand-up comedian, does this great bit where he's talking about the comment of Bush, how Bush says, the terrorists hate our freedom. And he goes, I hate our freedom. This is what we've done with it. But seriously, I mean, how did we get here? I think we're at a point where it's not just that we think of our media as mindless entertainment, but that it's actually become somewhat destructive to our culture in very often honoring the completely superficial and the empty. But this talk isn't about reprimand. It's about recognizing the power of our medium and evaluating games and examining them as a medium, as an artistic medium, that will become more powerful in the 21st century than radio, film, and television combined over the course of the 20th. So I'm interested in thinking of, could we seize the reins on this right now? Could we carpe ludum? Could we decide the course of where we want to take this medium over the course of the 21st century? I'm interested in getting people together from all aspects of games and game studies and seeing if we could decide a course we want to take it in. I'm interested in getting people from radio and film and television together, maybe to post-mortem their thoughts on what happened over the course of the 20th century, right? I'm serious. I think it would be really fascinating. It's thought that the reasons our modes of communication evolved into art was because we found it the best way to pass on our knowledge, pass on lessons learned to future generations. So I would like to get together and figure out, what do we want to pass on through the 21st century as a culture? I have to confess that I am compelled by a need to justify my existence on this earth, and that is a fire probably fueled by this degree from the University of Southern California. So I might be wrong here, but I have to try, because I do think that we are on the precipice of an extremely exciting time right now, and that this is an amazing opportunity that we're being given here. So I'm just going to leave you on this last quote, which I kind of hold near to my heart when I think about changing audience perspective of a medium. 85% of the juvenile crime which has been investigated has been found traceable either directly or indirectly to. And this is actually about motion pictures at the beginning of the 20th century. So if you're interested in joining the cause, please contact me, and thank you.